Sri Lanka had $51 billion in foreign debt. Then, in 2022, it ran out of dollars to pay. Within weeks, the government collapsed. The president fled the country. Protesters stormed his palace. Not because of a revolution, because they couldn't import fuel, medicine, or food. The debt didn't disappear. It just changed owners. And the new terms came with a price. Sell your ports, privatize your assets, cut every social program. Welcome to Financial Rewind. I'm here to show you how money actually works when the cameras aren't watching. And today, we're exposing the debt empire, a system that traps entire nations in permanent servitude, not through armies, but through loans they can never repay. This is how you colonize a country in the 21st century. No soldiers, no flags, just debt, interest, and the quiet transfer of sovereignty, one asset at a time. Accra, Ghana, 1957, Independence Day. After a century of British colonial rule, Ghana becomes the first sub-Saharan African nation to gain freedom. Prime Minister Kwame Nkrumah stands before crowds declaring, "We have won our freedom, now we must win our economic independence." The British Empire is dying. Colonies across Africa and Asia are breaking free. The age of direct rule is ending. But empires don't surrender power. They adapt. Ghana needed infrastructure, roads, dams, power plants, schools. To build them, it needed capital. The World Bank offered loans, the International Monetary Fund offered financing, Western governments offered development aid, all with interest, all denominated in foreign currency, all with conditions attached. Nkrumah took the loans. He had no choice. Ghana had resources: gold, cocoa, diamonds, but no factories to process them, no ports advanced enough to ship them efficiently, no power grid to industrialize. To build those things, you need money up front. And newly independent nations had none. So they borrowed from institutions created by the very powers they'd just freed themselves from. The loans seemed generous, low interest, long repayment periods, development partnerships, they called them. But there was a trap hidden in the terms, one that wouldn't activate for decades. The loans were denominated in dollars and pounds. To repay them, Ghana had to export raw materials, gold, cocoa, and convert the revenue to foreign currency. As long as commodity prices stayed high and the Ghanaian cedi stayed stable, the debt was manageable. But commodity prices don't stay high, and currencies don't stay stable. By the 1,980 seconds, Ghana's debt had ballooned to $3 billion, not because they'd borrowed more, but because commodity prices collapsed and the cedi devalued. The same debt that seemed reasonable at signing now consumed 40% of export revenue, just to pay interest. Ghana couldn't default. That would mean complete isolation from global finance. No more loans, no more trade credit, no ability to import necessities. So they went to the IMF, and the IMF offered a deal. Here's how debt colonization works. Step 1. A poor country needs infrastructure. Clean water, electricity, roads, hospitals. All the things rich countries built a century ago. To build them, they need capital. They don't have it, so they borrow. From the World Bank, the IMF, from wealthy governments, from private creditors. The loans are in foreign currency, dollars, euros, yen, not the country's own currency. Step 2. Repayment begins. To pay back dollars, the country must earn dollars. That means exporting commodities: copper, oil, cocoa, coffee, cotton. As long as prices are good, it works. Barely. Step 3. The trap activates. Commodity prices crash, or the local currency devalues, or global interest rates rise. Suddenly the debt becomes unpayable. What was 20% of export revenue becomes 60%. The country still needs to import fuel, medicine, food, but all the dollars go to debt service. Step 4. The country asks for help. The IMF steps in with a rescue package. More loans to pay off the old loans. But these loans come with conditions. Structural adjustment programs, they're called. Cut government spending, privatize state assets, remove subsidies on food and fuel, open markets to foreign competition, devalue your currency to make exports cheaper. Step 5. The country complies, because the alternative is total economic collapse. Public services disappear. State industries are sold to foreign investors at fire sale prices. The poorest citizens lose subsidies that kept them fed. But the debt remains. Often it grows, because the rescue loans have higher interest rates. Step 6. Repeat. Every decade, the crisis returns. More loans, harsher conditions, more assets sold. The country is independent on paper, but its economic policy is dictated by creditors in Washington, Paris, London. This isn't colonization through armies. It's colonization through compound interest. And it's been running for 60 years. Let's talk about Jamaica. A case study in debt servitude. Jamaica gained independence from Britain in 1962. 60 years later, it's still paying. Not for infrastructure, not for development, for debt service. In 2013, Jamaica spent 55% of government revenue on debt payments. 55%. Just interest and principal. That left 45% for everything else. Schools, hospitals, police, roads, social programs. For comparison, the United States spends about 8% of federal revenue on interest. Jamaica spent 7 times that proportion. Just to service debt. Where did this debt come from? In the 1,970 seconds, oil prices spiked. Jamaica, which imports all its fuel, faced a crisis. It borrowed to cover the gap. In the 1,980 seconds, global interest rates spiked. Reagan and Volcker fighting inflation in the U.S. Jamaica's variable rate debt exploded overnight. To pay, Jamaica borrowed more from the IMF, with conditions: cut public sector wages, reduce education spending, remove price controls on food, privatize utilities. Jamaica complied. The economy contracted. Unemployment rose. But the debt grew. In the 1,990 seconds, Jamaica's financial sector collapsed. The government bailed out the banks. Cost: 40% of GDP. That crisis debt is still being paid off today. By 2013, Jamaica's debt reached 146% of GDP, among the highest in the world. And here's the cruelest part. Much of that debt isn't funding development. It's funding previous debt payments. Jamaica borrows to pay interest on loans taken to pay interest on earlier loans. It's a Ponzi scheme. Except the victim is locked in by international law and has no escape. An IMF official, speaking privately in 2015, admitted, Jamaica has been compliant for 30 years. They've done everything we asked, and they're still trapped. At some point, you have to ask if the system itself is the problem. But the system doesn't change, because the system works. Just not for Jamaica. Zambia, 2020, the first African nation to default during COVID. Zambia owes $17 billion in external debt. Its entire GDP is $22 billion. For every dollar Zambia's economy produces, it owes 77 cents to foreign creditors. How did it get here? Copper. Zambia is one of the world's largest copper producers. In the 2000s, copper prices soared. China was industrializing, devouring commodities. Zambia borrowed heavily, expecting the boom to continue. Built infrastructure, expanded mining operations. Then copper prices crashed, from $10,000 per ton to $5,000. Zambia's export revenue halved, but the debt didn't. It's denominated in dollars, and the Zambian kwacha collapsed, making every dollar of debt more expensive in local terms. By 2020, Zambia was spending 30% of revenue just on interest payments. COVID hit, revenue collapsed further. Zambia asked creditors for relief. The response: restructure the debt, but only if you accept new conditions. One of Zambia's largest creditors? China, through loans for infrastructure projects. Another major creditor? Private bondholders, hedge funds that bought Zambian debt at high interest rates, betting on exactly this outcome. Zambia is negotiating. But negotiation from weakness isn't negotiation. It's surrender terms. The copper is still there, the mines still operate, but the profits flow to creditors, not to Zambians. The country is an extraction site with a flag. But here's where it gets darker. The debt trap is designed. In the 1,970 seconds, major banks were flush with oil money. OPEC nations deposited billions in Western banks after oil shocks. The banks needed borrowers. They found them in developing countries. Citibank CEO in 1,977. Countries don't go bankrupt. The pitch to investors. Sovereign debt is safe debt. They lent aggressively. Low interest rates. Few conditions. Latin America, Africa, Asia, all borrowed heavily. Then, in 1979, the U.S. Federal Reserve raised interest rates to 20% to fight inflation. Suddenly, every variable rate loan in the developing world became unpayable. Mexico defaulted in 1982. Then Brazil. Then Argentina. Then dozens of African nations. The debt crisis of the 1,980 seconds wasn't an accident. It was the predictable result of lending at low rates, then spiking them. And who stepped in to rescue these countries? The IMF and World Bank, with structural adjustment programs. The very institutions that had encouraged the borrowing now imposed austerity as the price of relief. An internal World Bank memo from 1984, declassified years later, explicitly stated, adjustment programs are an opportunity to fundamentally reshape developing economies toward market liberalization. The debt crisis wasn't a bug, it was leverage, a way to force economic restructuring that countries would never accept voluntarily. Privatize state industries, politically impossible under normal circumstances. But when you're bankrupt and the IMF is the only lender, you do what they say. Naomi Klein called it disaster capitalism. But it's older than that. It's debt imperialism, and it's been the dominant tool of control for half a century. Let's talk about what this looks like in human terms. Malawi, one of the world's poorest nations. In 2011, Malawi's government spent more on debt service than on healthcare. $120 million to creditors. $100 million on hospitals and clinics for 19 million people. Infant mortality, 42 per 1,000 births. Life expectancy, 64 years. The money that could save those children goes to banks in London and New York instead. A doctor in Lilongwe told a reporter in 2019, "We have patients dying because we can't afford basic antibiotics, but the debt payments never stop. Every month, like clockwork, the money leaves the country." This isn't incompetence. It's not corruption. It's the system functioning as designed. Creditors get paid first, always, before health care, before education, before food subsidies. International law enforces this. If a country stops paying creditors, it gets shut out of global finance entirely. But there's no international law that says children deserve medicine before bondholders get interest. Here's the mechanism that makes it permanent. Developing countries need dollars not just for debt payments, but for imports. Fuel, medicine, machinery, all priced in dollars. To get dollars, they export commodities. But commodity prices are volatile and generally declining. In 1960, a ton of copper bought 150 barrels of oil. Today, it buys 45. Countries have to export more and more just to buy the same imports, while simultaneously servicing debt that grows faster than their economies. It's a treadmill, and the speed keeps increasing. And here's the trap within the trap. To attract foreign investment, countries must maintain investor-friendly policies. That means low taxes on corporations, weak labor laws, minimal environmental regulations. If you raise corporate taxes to fund healthcare, foreign investors leave, your currency crashes, debt becomes more expensive. If you strengthen labor protections, companies relocate to countries that don't. The threat is always implicit: comply or watch your economy collapse. Sovereignty becomes theater. Elections happen, governments change, but the economic policy stays the same. Because the debt is the leash, and creditors hold it. Argentina shows what happens when you try to break free. Argentina defaults on $132 billion in debt, the largest sovereign default in history at the time. The economy collapses, banks freeze accounts, the currency crashes, unemployment hits 25%. But here's what happened next. For 15 years, Argentina was locked out of international credit markets. Couldn't borrow, couldn't refinance existing debt, had to run a balanced budget. The economy slowly recovered, not through loans, but through exports and domestic consumption. By 2016, Argentina was growing again, without IMF supervision, without structural adjustment. Then a new government was elected on promises to rejoin the world economy. They negotiated with holdout creditors, paid them $9.3 billion. In exchange, Argentina regained access to credit markets. Within months, it borrowed $16.5 billion. The cycle began again. By 2018, Argentina was back at the IMF for a $57 billion bailout, the largest in IMF history. Why? Because the addiction to borrowing is stronger than the will to stay free. Politicians need money for programs. Voters want services without higher taxes. Borrowing solves both problems, until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the IMF is there, with conditions, and the leash tightens again. So who actually controls this empire? Not a conspiracy. A network of institutions and incentives. The IMF and World Bank, created at Bretton Woods in 1944 to stabilize the global economy, now functioning as enforcement arms of creditor interests. Private bondholders, hedge funds that buy distressed debt at discounts, then sue for full repayment in New York or London courts. China, increasingly. Through Belt and Road loans that come with their own strings. Chinese contractors, Chinese workers, control over infrastructure, and credit rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, Fitch. 3 companies that determine whether a country can borrow affordably. Downgrade a country's credit rating, and borrowing costs spike overnight. The country faces a choice: accept austerity or face default. These agencies aren't accountable to voters. They're accountable to investors. And investors care about one thing: getting paid. The system is distributed. No one entity controls it, but collectively it ensures that debt is always paid and sovereignty is always conditional. Could countries just default? Walk away from debt? Technically, yes. Legally, it's complicated. When Argentina defaulted, holdout creditors sued in U.S. courts. They won. U.S. judges ordered Argentina to pay in full. When Argentina refused, creditors seized an Argentine Navy ship docked in Ghana. That's not metaphor. Creditors literally impounded a warship until Argentina paid. International law protects creditors more than it protects citizens. Vulture funds investors who buy defaulted debt at pennies on the dollar can sue for full repayment plus interest. They've seized national assets, frozen bank accounts, intercepted debt payments meant for other creditors, and they win, because the cases are tried in New York or London under laws written to protect creditors. Default isn't escape. It's a different kind of trap. But here's the most insidious part. Debt is profitable for everyone except the borrower. Western banks earn interest. The IMF collects fees. Consultants and lawyers bill millions. Even the borrowing government officials benefit. They get to fund projects, cut ribbons, win elections. The cost comes later, after they've left office, paid by the next generation. A finance minister in an African nation, speaking anonymously, "We all know the debt is unsustainable, but what am I supposed to do? Tell voters we can't build the hospital because we can't afford loans? I'll be voted out. The next person will take the loan anyway." The incentive structure guarantees the cycle continues. Politicians who refuse to borrow lose elections to politicians who promise everything. Countries that try to stay debt-free fall behind countries that borrow for development. And once you're in the system, leaving is nearly impossible, because the rest of the world runs on debt, and if you're not borrowing, you're not competitive. The empire of debt isn't held together by force. It's held together by necessity. Poor countries need dollars to import fuel and medicine. To get dollars, they export commodities at prices they don't control. To develop industries that could change this, they need capital. To get capital, they borrow. To repay, they export more commodities. It's a closed loop, and there's no exit that doesn't involve decades of hardship. China tried and succeeded. But it took 40 years of authoritarian control, currency manipulation, and worker exploitation. Most countries can't or won't do that, so they stay on the treadmill, exporting resources, importing debt, watching sovereignty erode one loan at a time. What can you do with this knowledge? If you live in a wealthy country, understand that your cheap goods are partly built on this system. The chocolate you buy, the phone you use, the coffee you drink, all of it flows from countries trapped in debt, forced to export raw materials at low prices to service loans they can never fully repay. If you live in a poor country, understand that poverty isn't inevitable. It's structural. The system is designed to extract, not develop. You can ask the questions nobody wants to answer. Why do international laws protect creditors but not citizens? Why is debt to foreign banks treated as sacred while obligations to your own people are negotiable? Why do we accept that a country should pay bondholders before feeding children? These aren't radical questions. They're obvious ones. The only reason they sound radical is because the system has made them invisible. Sri Lanka's president fled in a helicopter, protesters swimming in his pool, broadcasting live. The image went viral, the government collapsed, the debt remained. The new government negotiated with the IMF. The terms cut fuel subsidies, raise taxes, privatize state assets. The protesters got a new president, the creditors got their money. History doesn't repeat, it reveals. And right now, it's revealing a simple truth. You can change governments all you want, but if the debt remains, so does the leash. The empire of debt doesn't need soldiers. It just needs interest rates and repayment schedules. And it doesn't conquer nations. It just waits for them to ask for loans. Welcome to the empire. The one that rules through spreadsheets instead of swords. The one holding nations on a leash they can never quite escape.